Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, and today in the arena we are going to be checking in on some new cards coming soon. No, we're taking a break now from the traditional gameplay videos, different decks every single day. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I've done all the things I wanted to do in War of the Spark Standard. It's just the way it is. And I think this meta is due for a shakeup. I'm sure some of you feel the same way. And thankfully there is one coming in the form of M20. Core Set 2020, also known as M20. Wizards designed core sets to be less mechanic driven and less theme driven and introduce staple cards as well as cards that are simple to understand for beginners so that it provides them an easy way into Magic the Gathering. And because of that, core sets have had a reputation of being low power, not highly drafted, and not highly desirable sets. However, M20 seems to be taking a very different approach, and while there are still plenty of cards that are easy to understand for new players, there are the returns of very complicated mechanics as well as cards with a ridiculous amount of interesting text on them, poising it to create some new archetypes and some fun build-arounds. So without question, we are going to take a look at those cards and talk about them. I will almost always be talking about new cards from a place of a standard focused mindset, and I will often talk about cards from a best of one mindset, although we will do some sideboard card discussions as well. I'm going to break this into multiple videos instead of creating one or two long set review videos, mostly covering theme, and you'll be able to watch these over the next few days as we lead up to the Core 2020 release, when we'll be doing a release event on July 1st and 2nd that I've been invited to be a part of, and I'll be getting some early look content up there. And then I believe it's on July 3rd that Magic Arena will launch Core Set 2020 for all of you to play as well. I'll be creating some reviews of different card types. For example, today we're going to cover the Mythic Knight cycle that is in this set. It's going to be very fun. Future videos will focus on the lands, the planeswalkers, the tricolor cards, which look very exciting, cards specifically designed for the sideboard, and a variety of other playable cards, leading up to a video where I discuss the top 10 cards that I think you should craft for standard from Core Set 2020, and the top 3 decks that you should be looking to play and craft when Core Set 2020 comes out. So lots of video content to be made. I hope that you'll enjoy it, broken up into multiple videos that may release a couple videos per day as opposed to one huge video. Let me know if you like the format as always. And before we get into that, let's take a quick break to talk about the Flipside Gaming giveaway coming with Core Set 2020 and how you can win an entire booster box of Core 2020 and support the channel at the same time. Hey guys, let's take a quick break to talk about Flipside Gaming's Core 2020 booster box giveaway. From now until July 15th, you can win an entire box of M20 for free if you follow these steps. Number 1, find $10 or more worth of stuff at flipsidegaming.com that you like. Easy. They have singles, they have sealed product, and they have all the gaming supplies you need. So, number 2, use the promo code CGB before checkout. This saves you 10% and it supports the channel at the same time. Number 3, complete your order. That's it. Even a mono red player can figure it out. Please check out the links in the description to read the giveaway's rules and conditions, and thank you for supporting the channel. May the best mage win. The first card that we're going to talk about today is Cavalier of Dawn. Cavalier of Dawn is 2 white Elemental Knight Mythic Rare. Vigilance. When Cavalier of Dawn enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent its controller creates a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact creature token. When the Cavalier of Dawn dies, return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand for 6. So this is going to be the first of the Elemental Knights that we're going to discuss. And in general, this cycle of cards, they all have a few things in common. Their casting cost includes 3 mana of one color type and an additional 2, kind of restricting what types of decks they can go in. You have to be decently well committed to white. They're also 5-drops all the way around, so they're competing with other 5-drops in the spot, which is important to keep in mind. Then they have a huge variety of text and like different stats on the body for most of them. So everything for the rest of it, other than the creature type Elemental Knight, it varies a lot, and evaluating each card is interesting. Diving into Cavalier of Dawn, a 4/6 body right now is certainly hard to kill. We have a similar card in God Eternal Oketra at 3/6, and it's very hard to kill this with any kind of red-based or damage-based effect. And it is a big problem. God Eternal Oketra, though, also can't be killed by cast down, which is a problem that all these knights face. But fortunately, they baked in a dies clause onto all of these knights. So let's cover this one specifically. Vigilance is an okay ability. When you're a 4/6, being able to get in there, play offense and defense is fine. It lets you pressure planeswalkers, and the opponent's board usually can't deal with this. But this first ability, when it enters the battlefield, destroy one target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 Golem artifact creature token. If your opponent already has a 3/3 because you blew up one of their things, they only really need one other body to successfully get in front of the Cavalier. But that doesn't make the ability bad. Destroying any non-land permanent for a 3/3 is pretty good. This can come down and turn a very dangerous Teferi into just a 3/3 rock, which that a 3/3 hunk of stats is not that threatening. It's a good old beast within kind of clause. Not being able to hitting non-land permanents means, of course, you can't tag things like animated Nissa lands or Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, but you can hit the Nissa herself. You can blow up the Immortal Sun with this card. There's actually a lot of targets, but you do not have to target anything, or you could target your own things. If you have an Oath of Kaya sitting on the battlefield that's not doing anything right now because you don't have any planeswalkers or the opponent doesn't have any creatures to attack your planeswalkers, why not turn it into a 3/3? Thus giving you, for 5 mana, you get 7 power and 9 toughness worth of stats on 2 bodies. Not terrible. So what's next? When the Cavalier of Dawn dies, return an artifact or enchantment card to your graveyard, from your graveyard to your hand. With all of these knights, it's going to be interesting to try to put together how to get the most value from them. One thing that you could look at is, how about that Oath of Kaya I just mentioned that you blow up? Well, when this dies, you can return it back to your hand, play it, and do some damage and gain some life again. How about an enchantment that goes to the graveyard anyway? A card like History of Benalia would be a pretty good saga to get back. Once it's spent and it's already made 2 knights, go ahead and return it to your hand. How about artifacts? That one's a little bit tougher. You don't want to play bad artifacts like Sky Scanner. Maybe a Guild Globe is a way to draw an extra card, but there's nothing exciting about that. The most powerful artifacts in the format are definitely the Immortal Sun, a card I already mentioned blowing up with Cavalier of Dawn that you could play yourself. If you're not playing Planeswalkers for 5 or 6 mana, playing the Immortal Sun does seem like a pretty good step there. And there might be some other things we haven't quite seen. Artifacts that you want to put in the graveyard and somehow get put into the graveyard. Overall, the card is interesting, and we've talked about it the longest because it's the first of these nights. I won't have to explain the common things they have going after this. I think that white in particular is going to have to prove, why is this better than a Lyra Dawnbringer? Why is this better than a Tulsimir, Friend of Wolves? Why is this better than a Tristani Discordant? All of those cards are good, and some of them see a lot more play than others as it is. Plus there's also 5 mana Nissa that you can play if you're in green-white or something like that. This cycle of Element Knights is going to be a little bit challenged to get a good home, I think, while Standard is so huge, which it is after this set rotates in. But come fall, when things rotate out, maybe we'll free up some space. I like Cavalier of Dawn, though, quite a bit, mostly because it affects the board dramatically when it comes into play. Either you have a resounding amount of power and toughness on your side of the battlefield, or your opponent loses a key permanent and is replaced by a 3/3 that is outclassed by what's already on the other side of the battlefield. I do think you want to find a way to take advantage of that dies trigger. History of Benalia seems the most obvious to me, and there's probably some other things that I haven't quite figured out. Ixalan's Binding and Prison Realm are removal spells you could play that are enchantments the opponent would want to blow up. So there's a lot of there's options, let's just say that. I'm going to be optimistic about playing Cavalier of Dawn in a few spots, and I can't wait to see just how strong that 4/6 Vigilant body is when facing off against the other threats in the format. Our next card is Cavalier of Gales. As I saw somebody call it the Rainy Knight, or that was on Scryfall. Scryfall, when something is spoiled in a foreign language, often puts a funny title on it, and Rainy Knight I thought was a great name for the card. It looks a little like the Night King from Game of Thrones, riding some kind of a seahorsey dragon. I can 100% dig it. So this is blue, 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 and a 2 for a flying elemental knight that is a 5/5. So 5 mana for a 5/5 body is already something, and there's more text, thank goodness. So when Cavalier of Gales enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. When Cavalier of Gales dies, shuffle it into its owner's library, then scry 2. So this is an interesting take on a brainstorm or ponder type effect, definitely a brainstorm type effect from very old sets. This card, drawing 3 and then putting 2 cards from your hand back on top, and finding this is just decent value. If you do nothing else with this, if you don't try to maximize it, you're paying 5 mana for a 5/5 flying that essentially draws a card, but you get to pick which of the 3 it is. Now, if you combine this with a way to shuffle your library, you can put 2 cards from your hand back on top that you don't like nearly as much and shuffle them away. Or maybe you just want to do that for one of the cards. Giving yourself options like that and maximizing your draw steps is a really good move. But there's even more that you can do with Cavalier of Gales. I would be remiss if I didn't mention a little bit of a combo. So Cavalier of Gales already works well with God Eternal Kefnet, because if you put spells back on top of your library and then reveal them in your future draw steps with God Eternal Kefnet, you do get to copy those spells. But for like the real juice, how about we play Karn's Temporal Sundering off the God Eternal Kefnet? So it goes like this. You play God Eternal Kefnet, you play Cavalier of Gales, draw 3, and put 2 back. The one you put on top is Karn's Temporal Sundering. The next turn, you draw the Karn's Temporal Sundering and copy it with God Eternal Kefnet and return the Cavalier of Gales to your hand. Then you play Cavalier of Gales again, draw 3 cards, make the one on top the Karn's Temporal Sundering, and do this every turn to take all of the turns without Nexus of Fate. We could already do this with a card called Riverwise Augur, but Riverwise Augur is just a 2/2 body for 4 mana. It's a pretty weak card. Cavalier of Gales is strong on its own, which might enable a combo like this to actually be a little bit of a thing. I already made a deck in the last format that used Karn's Temporal Sundering with God Eternal Kefnet and Saheeli to do a whole bunch of mean things, as well as Rahl, and I could see this card getting in there because even if you're nowhere near your combo, this helps you get closer to the combo, and it's just a great body on its own. Now, when it dies, you have to shuffle the library, and then you scry 2. The scry 2 is nice and all. Be careful, if your God Eternal Kefnet gets killed and is 3rd from the top, and then the opponent kills your Cavalier of Gales, it shuffles away the God Eternal Kefnet, unless you're lucky enough to scry back to it. The death benefit here is pretty self-contained, meaning it's pretty nice no matter what happens unless you have a reason not to shuffle your library. While the front side is also pretty self-contained. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 of them back on top in any order is good no matter where you are in the game. And 5 mana for a 5/5 is far from terrible. Once you put those things together, this might be the most likely of the Elemental Knights, the mythic Elemental Knights, to see play on its own as strictly a good card, and that does make it more likely to show up in decks that can take even more advantage of it, such as a God Eternal Kefnet or Karn's Temporal Sundering list. Our third mythic knight friend is the Cavalier of Knight. It's a knight who is a Cavalier of Knights. This is the 2 black elemental mythic knight. It is a 4/5 body this time with lifelink, so bringing the life gain straight to the battlefield. When Cavalier of Knight enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target creature an opponent controls. That's really good. Any creature the opponent controls. Destroy, just target. If it's a critter, blow it up. You do have to sacrifice another creature, so maybe we're looking at explorer creatures to sacrifice. That's usually not too hard. A token of some kind that we got from a Hero Precinct 1, or a knight from History of Benalia. Definitely want it in a deck with plenty of sacrificial fodder creatures. Now, move on to the next clause. When Cavalier of Knight dies, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, smaller creatures, cards with mana cost of 3 or less, gain a lot of value because we can bring them back and use them over and over again. This card certainly can have a home in Aristocrats or some kind of Reanimator Shell where we actually want things in the graveyard, or just with value-oriented creatures. Cards that I can see doing well with this type of effect include Journey to Eternity, which sacrificing the card and getting it right back is great. Ravenous Chupacabra, destroy a thing. Next turn, play Cavalier of Knight, sacrifice the Chupacabra, destroy another thing. When it dies, get back something else. How about a Plague Crafter? That sounds like a really sweet plan. There's a number of value cards all over the spectrum. You can get back Jadelight Ranger and keep filling up your graveyard or drawing more lands. It feels like this card has a ton of potential. The lifelink body in particular is nice because what do you need to do around turn 5 if you're against a very aggressive deck? You need to start turning the corner if you're some kind of a black mid-range deck. Nowadays, aggressive decks go long. They can grind. They have cards like Experimental Frenzy, which can play a ton of cards off the top of your deck while your green-black deck does fair things, like just cast larger and larger creatures. A little bit of lifelink and a large body can buy you that time while the opponent is doing frenzying stuff to get to close the game yourself. So I think that Cavalier of Knight is another one with a lot of potential to show up. The mana cost is pretty prohibitive, as green-black would need to have plenty of black sources available. Paradise Druid can help, so maybe it's not as bad as it seems. And in general, I'm a fan of the card. I think that where I want to start is an Explorer package. I know, boring. Plague Crafter sounds pretty great for hitting those planeswalkers. Chupacabra and Cavalier of Knight just seems like there's a lot of like enter the battlefield effect, go to the graveyard, get it back effect. And I think that sounds really fun. There are also some other cards in the set that can go with this that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. The next card that we're going to discuss is Cavalier of Flame. This is the Red Knight. It has 2 red for the casting cost, Elemental Knight, Mythic Rare. This is a 6/5 body. The art is freaking sweet. And it says, 1 in a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. Right away, let's just say if you have 2 extra mana the turn you cast this, you have a 7/5 haste for 7. It's not terrible. When Cavalier of Flame enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many of cards. So you get to wheel your hand upon entering the battlefield. And how many cards in your hand do you have with a traditional red deck? Probably not many, but there's more to this card. When Cavalier of Flame dies, it deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. It's a pretty epic death trigger. The extra damage dealt to a player, of course, can kill them, but each planeswalker they control, we've seen that planeswalker decks are taking over, and usually you just feel helpless and in a ton of trouble when your opponent has 3 to 4 planeswalkers on the battlefield and you don't know what to attack or necessarily what to do. Well, if you have lands in your graveyard and a dead Cavalier of Flame, you just blow all that stuff up. Of course, if you have enough lands in your graveyard, you can just potentially lethal them with Cavalier of Flame, which is even better than killing all of their planeswalkers. And considering that this can give out haste and deal a ton of damage while it's on the battlefield, the opponent can be in a no-win situation. Kill it, they die. Let it live, they die. So how do we make sure that we, 1, get lands into our graveyard, and 2, have plenty of cards in our hand the turn that we play Cavalier of Flame? The Explorer package continues to be a standard role player, just enabling more and more archetypes as we go. You might be a little tired of seeing the Explorer package, but the way that it plays with new cards, I think, has proven that's an important mechanic for Magic the Gathering, and honestly, it might stick around long after rotation. here we have Jadelight Ranger, which can get more lands into your hand. There's also some other cards like Nissa's Triumph and a few other things that can just make sure that your hand is full of land cards at the right time. Most of them are in green. Green seems to play well with this. And then on the other hand, we have Scapeshift, which lets us sacrifice any number of lands, search our library for that many land cards, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. So for 4 mana, if we only had 4 lands, we can just switch those lands and have 4 lands in our graveyard. This ensures that if Cavalier of the Flame dies, it'll deal at least 4 damage to each opponent and 4 damage to each planeswalker. But this scales well into the mid game. The more lands we have on the battlefield, the larger our Scapeshift power becomes, the more kind of, how would you say, inevitable the Cavalier of Flame becomes. This isn't all, though. There's even more nonsense to be done. Nahib, Dreadhorde Champion for 2 and a red is a trample legendary zombie Minotaur warrior, and when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you can discard a number of cards. If you do draw that many cards and add that much red, and the mana doesn't leave as phases end. So imagine that you do, say, play a Nahib, and then discard a number of land cards, draw some fresh cards, get some fresh next turn attack, make some mana, play a Cavalier of Flame, discard more of those cards you don't want, draw some more cards, use the extra mana. I mean, there's worse things, but honestly, it doesn't quite go together, right? The extra mana just doesn't quite pump this. So cards like this are honestly what I think of when I think of Cavalier of Flame. Now, Cavalier of Flame is a better card. It has a much better stat line with much more applications, and we're trying to get a lot more out of it. So I think it's better than Nahib. But Nahib does have a similar effect that was rarely used. Being an enter the battlefield effect is much better than being a combat damage effect. So I do think Cavalier of Flame has a lot more potential, but I think the fail state on this card is higher than on the other knights that we've previewed so far. I think that the blue one, the white one, and the black one all have very relevant enter the battlefields. I think that Cavalier of Flame might come out and not cycle any cards and have very few cards in the graveyard. So if you are opening Cavalier of Flame, great. If you're considering crafting Cavalier of Flame, we'll have to look for a really synergistic combo deck, I think, to make use of all the abilities. And otherwise, we're paying 5 mana for a 6/5 that will sometimes Fire Breathe for an expensive 2 mana. So this is the one I'm the least enthused about. But well, on its own, it's the least exciting on its own. It probably has the highest upside in a shell around other things. So I like Cavalier of Flame for synergies. I think finding a way to break it, especially with Scapeshift, is interesting, but I don't think it's just going to slam into some red decks to see how it does. The last of the night cycle is Cavalier of Thorns. Cavalier of Thorns is 2 and a green and a green and a green for an elemental knight. It is a 5/6 body this time. Has reach, and when Cavalier of Thorns enters the battlefield, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest into your graveyard. If Cavalier of Thorns dies, you may exile it. If you do, put another target card from your graveyard on top of your library. Okay, this one's interesting. Reach as a keyword is not as exciting to me as most of the other keywords, although a 5/6 body can block a Lyra Dawnbringer. Most dragons don't want to tangle with the Cavalier of Thorns, so it has its moments. Now, the enters the battlefield trigger is interesting. You already have 5 mana. Do you really need a 6th land? But there's more to this ability than that. For one thing, you can grab any land. It doesn't have to be a basic land, so that is a nice lack of restriction. You can grab a blast zone or a mobilized district. You can grab a shock land of dual colors that you need for, say, a Niv Mizzet Reborn, some nonsense of that nature. But I think that the interesting text here is that you put the rest of the cards not on the bottom of your library, as so many other things like Elvish Rejuvenator do, but you put them into the graveyard. Now, if we are filling up our graveyard and fueling it, and we have graveyard synergy that we want to reach, Cavalier of Thorns is 5 mana for a decent body that does help fill our graveyard. And I can see that being a good thing, especially when you look at the second ability. When it dies, you may exile it, put another target card from the graveyard on top of your library. Target card. So if we needed a reanimation spell to bring back a Multani to attack for 1,000,000, like a Bond of Revival, we could choose that. It doesn't have to be a creature or a permanent, which is often a restriction that green can run into. So I like this for graveyard combo decks, and also for kind of the dredge synergy. 5 cards is a good high amount of cards to hit things like Narcomoebas and Creeping Chills, or assemble graveyard critical mass. It also curves right into a Zony Thousand Eyes to make a bunch of insects, and I think that there's something really here, that this card could do some interesting combos. If you have a way to, I mean, if they kill it, you get a card back, but if you have a way to sacrifice it, you also get to stack the top card of your library. Zony Thousand Eyes would be happy to sacrifice it and then draw that card. It's pretty good stuff. So I'm optimistic for Cavalier of Thorns in a specific type of graveyard comboed black-green type of deck. And that is another thing where, like, the red knight, I'm not sure what that combo looks like, some kind of a wacky scape shift thing, but the black-green, I feel like I know what that combo looks like. Pack the graveyard, bring back a Lolith Giant, something like that. In fact, let's get these homies on screen for the kids at home. So yeah, we play this and other cards that fill up our graveyard while also ramping us, and then we either bring back from the graveyard with a reanimation spell a card like Zony Thousand Eyes or Lotlith Giant, or we use the ramp land that we got here to cast these cards and hopefully deal our opponents silly amounts of damage. The strategy hasn't worked in Standard yet, and I think that's strictly because the ways to mill your graveyard have been limited to Stitcher's Supplier and Glowspore Shaman, which aren't reliable or very good. The Explorer package can do an okay job of this, but it doesn't do a great job. You really want to be hitting 4s and 5s on your mill strategies, and you want cards that scale decently into the mid-game. I think that we've introduced those now, and I think that Cavalier of Thorns is a key one, so I can see this becoming a very fun deck. Bonus card, you thought that we were done, but I'm not quite done. I have another card that reminds me of these knights, even though it's not one of them, because it's also 5 mana for an interesting ball of stats and abilities. So we're also going to cover today Gallos, the Tireless Pilgrim. For 5 colorless mana, you get a legendary artifact creature Scout. Scout type, yeah. When Scout Tribal, when as a Boy Scout, I need this. It is a 3/5 body, not very good for 5 mana, but it is 5 generic mana, so the bodies have to be kind of scaled down a little bit. When the Tireless Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This is another land card, not a basic land, not a land that only produces mana. This can be all kinds of special lands. This can be your Blast Zone in your Mobilized District. This can be your Arch of Harazka. So it's interesting that it has that text, and there's some other lands in the set you may want to eventually fetch as well. Now, for Wooburg, that is what people say when they mean white, blue, black, red, and green. Abbreviated it, sounded out, it sounds like Wooburg. So for 2 generic and Wooburg, you can exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana cost. That is an exciting ability with an expensive 5-color sort of requirement on it. 7 mana to get that ability means you A, really want to hit, and B, really want it to pay off. But it gives this body a good value engine endgame, and I do think that this card might be playable. The fact that it has an ETB that helps fix your mana to make it possible to use the effect is one thing. The other thing is that it is just a good value card on its own. It's fine, a 3/5 that got you another card that sets you up. If you have another big sort of end game that you're playing to, you can get there with the help of Gallos. Maybe you're going to cast Star of Extinction or Casualties of War, something like that to keep the opponent off balance. Big, expensive, cool stuff. And then you want to use that extra ability as your mana pans out. How do you get all 5 colors? There's still Chromatic Lantern in the format, but I've honestly been able to use cards like Paradise Druid along with things like that to cast, and the shock lands. There's just so many dual lands in the format that I've actually cast Niv Mizzet Reborn plenty of times without a Chromatic Lantern on the battlefield. And if I can do that, then maybe I can activate that ability on the Tireless Pilgrim more than I think. If I need a shell for the deck, the first place I'll try it is my Niv Mizzet Reborn deck. It sort of slots right in as something to get if I already have a Niv on the battlefield. And then after that, is there a deck that can just be built around abusing this card and the ability? Can we play something like a Jeskai control deck that gets the last couple colors off of the occasional dual lands and casting the Pilgrim to get, say, the one overgrown tomb in the deck, and then you just need one other way to make a mana of any color, and then you're just using this ability, casting free stuff, is not X spells, but it would need to be powerful free stuff. And maybe Niv Mizzet Reborn is perfect for a job like that, but free Teferis, free Nexus of Fates in best of 3, those kind of things are a little bit nutty and probably not what you want to do. You want some pretty big impact. I'm sure somebody will play as a comma off of this if they're doing all the colors anyway. Those kind of things sound fun. This casting a Githoth and then getting a bunch of dinosaurs. Maybe this is part of Dinosaur's Last Hurrah. Anyway, the waterfall over here just tells the story. This thing can waterfall out of control, and I really like it. I think it's a really cool card. That brings us to the end of this video review for the Elemental Knights, and as a quick sum up, I think Cavalier of Dawn will be an interesting inclusion in all kinds of white-based value decks. It doesn't require a certain combo to be a very strong card, and it's a good answer to all kinds of things. Cavalier of Gales might be strong in a number of different blue decks, but I'm most interested in trying it in a combo deck with the Karn's Temporal Sundering and God Eternal Kefnet especially. I want to play this alongside. Cavalier of Knight seems like an excellent value card and utility card. The lifelink is just what I'm looking for in many green and black and blue and black lists, and the ability to sacrifice a creature but then get one back when it dies means you want to play smaller value creatures. I'm looking forward to trying this with the Explorer package, but also with other kinds of decks that just play a number of smaller things, and it could go in Black-White Knights as well. So I think that this is probably, if I had to pick a best of them, I think Cavalier Knight is the best on its own. Cavalier of Thorns looks amazing for a graveyard recursion deck, and if you love those kind of self-mill graveyard decks, this is a card you're going to want to pick up quickly because I think it will pay off dramatically in that spot. Cavalier of Flame is a card I'm really not sure what the home will look like. It might have the most combo potential of all of these cards, but I am not sure where it goes or what that deck looks like or how to make it even what I'm looking for. So I am down on Cavalier of Flame until somebody shows me exactly the level of nonsense one can do, and maybe I will find a way to embrace it. And Gallo's Tireless Pilgrim is just an excellent card for my Neo-Niv kind of strategy, and just getting more value, more payoff, fixing mana. I do believe it will have a home. I'm not sure that it will be competitive. It looks like a very fun card to me, and I do want to play it several times over in all kinds of things. I just don't know when or how I'm going to use that bottom ability, but it's gonna happen. I'm gonna find a way. The archetype is less clear, but I want to grind people out with that bottom ability someday. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I will see you in the next video, and this time I'll give you a preview. The next video is most likely to be the tricolor shard cards from Core 2020 that I can't wait to talk to you more about. So, I interrupted my own outro. This is cringy. Bye!